Hello and welcome to World Talks here on TVP World, where every word matters. I'm Diana Skaya. In recent days, attention has been on leaders gathering at key meetings in Munich, Paris, and Riyadh, all aimed at finding a solution to end the war in Ukraine. But now the question remains, were any of these discussions successful, and what's the next phase in the peace process? Now, on February 18, Polish President Andrzej Duda also met with U.S. Special Representative Kellogg at the presidential palace, where the focus was also on peace talks surrounding Ukraine. Now, joining me now to discuss these developments and more is Mariia Zolkina, Head of Regional Security and Conflict Studies at the Democratic Initiatives Foundation in Kiev. Mariia, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me.
Today was quite a big day of talks. I'm not even going to talk about what happened in Munich and Paris. What are your key and main takeaway from this meeting in Saudi Arabia, where essentially Ukraine had no place at the table?
Well, de facto, we have been witnessing pretty dramatic developments for Ukraine, and pretty fast, I would say. And the fact of the meeting between the Russian delegation and American delegation is not a problem per se. However, we should remember about what has preceded that. So what was before that meeting? Ukraine was consciously excluded from the table of negotiations. Ukraine was deprived of its right to continue with the sustainable demands for NATO membership and security guarantees, and even the very principle of territorial integrity was severely undermined by messages given by public officials on the US side. All this put Ukraine in very unfavorable situation right now. That's why, if to assess everything together, we would say that this meeting is a really bad signal for Ukraine, because negotiations have started without taking into account the position of the victim of this aggression and without the position of the European Union and Europe generally, who will be the next victim politically or militarily in case Ukraine falls.
If you add now to the meetings that took place at the Munich Security Conference, the emergency meeting that was in Paris, I mean, would you say that these talks have moved the needle towards a resolution to the war in Ukraine? Or do you still think that, I mean, is there a chance? And when could we see possibly the Ukrainian president to actually take part in these meetings?
I would say that we are pretty far from the real solution of the conflict, first and foremost, because the strategic solution is not even being discussed. We have been discussing temporary measures, in particular a ceasefire and the ceasing of active warfare, instead of finding the formula which will prevent another attack of Russia. And
what will that be?
That would be certain bilateral or multilateral security guarantees and stepping in to support Ukraine, backing Ukrainian army. So here we can talk either about NATO membership or about bilateral security guarantees in the form of strengthening of already existing security treaties Ukraine have signed with around 30 countries, including US, by the way, or at least speaking about international, multinational de facto, international mission to Ukraine to the front line with the possibility of them to become a combatant. However, none of these ideas seems to be comfortable even under these circumstances for even European leaders, and not to speak even about the current US administration.
Mariia, how do you feel about that at these meetings? Let's look at the humanitarian aspect for a moment here. How do you feel that there's possibly no even mention of Russian war crimes at this table? I mean, of course, Zelensky clearly emphasizes that Ukraine's territorial integrity is a non-negotiable. But I mean, how could eyes be closed upon everything that's happened in the past, what will be now 3 years of war?
The goal of Trump administration seems to be just to have a short-term result, short-term outcome, regardless of the price of this outcome. For this reason, we have been hearing pretty loyal and sympathetic approach toward Russia, basically promising Russia what they wanted: a political veto, lack of responsibility, lifting of sanctions, or at least enabling Russia to trade easily in comparison to what we had and Russia had in terms of restrictions for the last 3 years. So from this point of view, it's a pretty unwise approach, I would say. And the outcomes and after effects of this approach, they will be strategic and long-term. However, the result itself, I mean ceasefire, is not even guaranteed at all, even for a short term.
In your view, will Kellogg's visit to Ukraine indicate any sort of pressure for Zelensky or the Ukrainian government overall to accept Washington's, proposals coming from Washington? Like you just mentioned that it's almost as if Trump just wants to speed up this process to find a temporary solution rather than actually resolve the conflict.
I would expect the strengthening of this political pressure. I think no one from the US side is even trying to hide this kind of political pressure. Even the idea which came from Ukraine back in September 2024 to include American companies into controlling and developing Ukrainian natural resources has turned out to be a very dead in terms of its nature proposal on the side of the US just to give up on natural resources to Ukraine in the interest of US and just paying something which Ukraine was not ought to pay. I mean the aid which was given to Ukraine by the previous US administration. So no one is hiding that there will be pressure on Ukraine. However, I do expect and I do hope that politically Kellogg will feel a mood in Kyiv. In case he meets not only political elites, but also representatives of the expert community, representative of civil society, which is pretty strong in Ukraine, he will definitely feel that they can push Ukraine towards compromises or concessions to Russia, but there is a domestic players in Ukraine, not just Zelensky, but Ukrainian society, who will consider this as a political betrayal of the country and creating perfect conditions for Putin to attack one more time and honestly to occupy Ukraine in the nearest future without help of US or European Union.
What's your assessment of how the European Union overall is navigating its support for Ukraine? I mean, earlier also Germany announced a new military aid package for Ukraine. What's your assessment on that?
My assessment is that these decisions are not final yet, and they will not be the final solution to substitute the support, military and financial aid which used to come from the US to Ukraine. And this approaches which is being developed now in the European Union is just a speed reaction to what they have heard in Munich conference, that they will be responsible on their own for their security in case something is happening between Russia on the one hand and NATO and European Union on the other hand. I mean, hybrid or conventional attacks on the side of Russia somewhere against these countries. But final decisions and strategic decisions like sending contingent, strengthening already existing security agreements with Ukraine is not on the table yet. And I think that the price for being too late and being even now less ambitious than it is needed for the moment might be too high, not just for Ukraine, but in particular for European Union states. And Germany is one of the countries who resisted and is still resisting NATO membership for Ukraine. And even here, even current leader of Germany, who is not going to be the next chancellor of Germany, still doesn't change his rhetoric. This means that this kind of perceptions that half steps might be enough is deeply rooted in the mind of many of the political elites in Europe.
Do you think the fact that Zelensky was in Turkey today with the Turkish president, what role do you think Turkey is going to play now? Erdogan might play in all this negotiation process.
Turkey has actually already played pretty significant role once, at least at within this large-scale war, when they really handled, together with UN, short-term and pretty tactical agreement, indirect one, that was very important at that moment between Ukraine and Russia through the UN mediation, through the Turkish mediation, I mean grain deal back in 2022. So they were pretty wise here, and they might be very supportive politically to Ukraine, despite they also against, for instance, NATO membership for Ukraine. But Erdogan is also fearing that he might not be one of the main regional players. That's the general strategy of Turkey, that everything happening in the region or in the sub-region, in particular in Black Sea region, should be decided by the countries who are in this region and not by the US in this case, or not by global powers just dividing spheres of influence. So, and Turkey also, which is a positive signal today, Erdogan has supported and repeated the idea that he's supportive of territorial integrity of Ukraine. This is because of Crimea. It's started not from 2022, but basically because of Crimean Tatars who have close ties with Turkey. And so Turkey has sustainability here, that territorial integrity of Ukraine should be restored and territories should return under Ukraine's control. So I expect that as of now, not only European Union countries, not only UK on the one hand, on the west side, let's say, but also Turkey might be interested in playing more active role in preventing a big deal or bargaining around Ukraine and security in Europe just between Russia and US.
Do you think that that might actually push his relations away from Russia?
You mean Turkish and Russia relations? I think Erdogan has a pretty long-term story of wise maneuvers. He was pretty good at this diplomacy of trying to balance between different regions and sub-regions in Europe and around the world. So I do expect that they will succeed to present their request for being involved in setting up a new regional architecture in Europe without breaking all the ties with Russia, like they haven't done until now.
And Mariia, just very briefly, Poland has committed to keeping U.S. troops on the ground, but they've not deployed any in Ukraine. How is Ukraine responding or going to respond to this decision?
Of course, Ukraine is expecting that the largest armies in Europe, even if without US deployed contingent in Europe, that the largest armies in Europe, including Polish one, will be ready at some point politically to send their troops to Ukraine, unless they are ready to witness at some point another large-scale attack with open-end story for Ukraine.
So you're saying that it would be possible?
It should be possible. Otherwise, they will face this challenge probably on their own territory.
Thank you so much, Mariia Zolkina, Head of Regional Security and Conflict Studies, for breaking it all down for us here today on TVP World. And that completes this edition of World Talks here this evening. I'm Diana Skaya. Thanks for watching.